comes to Lord Ganesha with a humble, heartfelt namaskar to all readers and listeners. A story dedicated and offered as a humble offering on 15th August 2020 to all freedom fighters, martyrs, soldiers, and defense personnel without whose infinite sacrifices none of us would have existed. And now, from the prolific pen of stinky grumpy grandpa Pandemonium, from his recently re-excavated, dilapidated, derelict, decrepit warehouse of recycled, reserved, rehashed, remixed, redundant, regurgitated, repeated, remodeled, repaired, refurbished, repolished stories. Tunu tunu tararararara. Title of the story: Hickory Dickory Dock, or the Mouse's Red Shining Hat. Dick 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 dick. Part 2 of Total 4 begins. The royal court in turmoil. So proud was Mr. Hickory Dickory Dock of his new acquisition that he just lay at home twiddling his thumbs and toes, thinking which function he should now attend next to flaunt his fancy hat. Naturally, Mrs. Mouse was fed up of her husband's idle lazing and pompous strutting. She decided she had tolerated him long enough. So the very next morning, she pulled up the rug on which Mr. Mouse was sleeping, thus rolling him out, and began her squeaking rant. "You inferior, indolent, infernal idiot, you lowly, lazy lump of less than normal layman's sense coming from hell, wake up and get ready to go. Arise and awake and stop not till you are out of the door." Here, the listener may note, like this author, Mrs. Mouse had a penchant or liking to use bombastic terms and then repeat them in simple words so that a common person could comprehend or understand them at least in the second sentence or next line. Anyway, returning to our story. Seeing his wife in a do-or-die mode, Mr. Mouse went to a wise old owl who resembled Grandpa Pandemonium for career counseling. "With your talents of inciting fools, young guy, the only avenue left is event-based parlor tricks or politics. And as our kingdom's capital is full of fools, I see a bright future awaits you there," advised the old owl, mainly with a view to rid his village or town of this pugnacious trouble-mongering menace. "You will definitely get your just rewards there," said the wise old owl. Heeding its advice, and as there was a free reservation in all airline cargo holds for all rodent passengers, as per the law passed in that land, Mr. Mouse caught the very next flight to the kingdom's capital and landed at the King's Royal Darbar. In that large gathering of over-bloated balloons and windbags, no one noticed, let alone greet tiny Mr. Mouse, as almost all were belly blind, meaning they had no vision of anything below their huge pot bellies. As Mr. Allwind Hickory Dickory Dock suffered, like most of us, from ass or attention-seeking syndrome, he was naturally quite offended and a bit miffed or angry and upset at this courtly cold-shoulder welcome, with his presence being totally ignored in the royal gents section. So, to try his luck elsewhere, he went sightseeing into the royal harem and the ladies section of the royal court. Here, to announce his arrival with maximum effect, he used the method most commonly used by his family tradition of mice, namely fart, also known as falling appropriately readily technique. In one swing from the ceiling chandelier, he landed himself right in the middle of the voluptuous bosom of a royal maid carrying a bowl of hot water for the court soprano singer's throat gargles. At once, the reaction was more than he expected. So shocked and scared was the royal maid at this sudden surprise entry of a stranger into her bosom that she flung in fright the bowl of hot water on all the royal guests, making them run helter and skelter. Mr. Mouse slipped and fell deeper and deeper, perhaps purposely so, inside the cavernous clothes of the maid. The poor maid was frightened out of her wits by the weird tickling sensation caused by the wriggling tail and whiskers of Mr. Mouse inside her undergarments. Panicking and not knowing how best to get rid of this intruder in her inner apparel, she started screaming and simultaneously, spontaneously, swiftly shedding her clothes to shoo away the strange wriggling object. This unexpected cabaret of the royal maid only made matters worse, driving the whole royal court into a wild frenzy. Finally, Mr. Mouse emerged from the heap of clothes ejected by the maid, who by now was standing, trembling and shivering in her birthday suit. On seeing that the expelled creature is a mere scampering mouse, oh, what a screaming, shouting, screeching, shrieking, and squealing emanated from the queen's and ladies' chamber. Some shrieks were even higher than the highest notes of the soprano singer. With many people banging into each other in the wild ruckus, fearing that there were many more rats who had infiltrated their garments with dangerous explosives, some hysterical courtiers, a few innocently, while majority many others with malicious intent began stripping and tearing each other's clothes in a frantic bid to rid themselves of the dangerous pest. For a while, pure wild confusion, cacophony, and commotion prevailed. Pandemonium reigned supreme. As the shrieks and stripping were reaching a crescendo, finally, a brave member of the king's guard, intending to impress a damsel of the court, at great risk to his life, with a deadly dive, pounced and caught Mr. Mouse by his collar. Dragging the squeaking mouse before the king, he said, "Here, your highness, is the dreaded terrorist who had held the royal court hostage." Well, said the king. "A mere mouse who turned my royal court into a striptease club. Much ado about nothing." "And what brings you here, Mr. Mouse?" asked the king. Having caught the attention of the king by fair means or foul, the first part of his mission accomplished, Mr. Mouse, without wasting any more words or time, came straight to the point. Bowing to the king, he said, "I have come, your highness, to challenge and prove that my red shining hat is better than your royal crown." "What? You crazy loon! My royal golden crown is adorned with diamonds, rubies, pearls, and gems, while your lowly hat has only a red shining lace. Can you even compare the two? What does your hat have that my crown doesn't?" asked the astounded king. "Cunning and crafty, sly and slinky, Mr. Mouse secretly smiled. The king's query was just what he wanted. The king had fallen for his bait, hook, line, and sinker. Like Disneyland, which is the largest trap laid by a mouse for a man, the king had fallen into his verbal trap. After a dramatic silent pause, in a soft tone but a loud, clear voice that penetrated every eager eavesdropping eardrum in the court, the mouse replied, Your Highness, my hat has a tinkle, it has a melodious jingle. It tinkles and it jingles with the dingling of its dangler. Your crown doesn't squeak, let alone even speak. It is just a mute mutt and can't even strut. Can your crown to boast, if it could ever speak, of a tingalingaling or a dingalingaling and sing with a tinkle like my hat's jingle? Preposterous! Whoever heard of a bejeweled royal crown that tinkles with a jingle bell dangling from it? Laughed the king. Have you any common sense or sense of discernment, let alone any sense of aesthetics? Do you know what gels and what is jarring? What goes with what and what doesn't? What suits something and what doesn't? What lends beauty, grace, and dignity, and what looks stupid and silly or frivolous and funny? Be that as it may, said Mr. Mouse with an acquired air of snobbish superiority. The fact remains that your crown doesn't jingle while my royal hat does, and therefore either tie a bell onto your crown, or by the well-known law of exceptions that prove the rule of the land, you must concede defeat and admit that my red shining tinkling hat is finer and better than thy royal crown. The proof of the pudding lies in its eating and tasting. The proof of the crown lies in its tingling, jingling, and tinkling. The king at first was a bit perplexed at this convoluted logic, but soon smartly realized that it was a cunning ruse used by Mr. Mouse, who was only trying to tempt and fool him into doing an act which would only make the king appear foolish and ridiculous, by quoting archaic, outdated old laws to incite and confuse the king. Indeed, the mouse with his skills in convoluted logic could very well prove that the sun rises in the southwest, while we all know that in reality it rises in the west-south. Faced with a tricky situation which was now no longer a laughing matter, the king asked his advisory committee, labeled the Royal Hyped Up Coterie of Court Consultants, Pray tell me, O bald, grey-haired wise ones, how do we deal with this upstart? At once the advisers gathered behind his throne and plunged into a show of a very deep and profound discussion, evident by the loud whispering for a long while. Finally, it culminated or ended with them giving each other a crisscross clap, and the most senior of them emerged and bowed to the king. Then, with his right hand above the king's crown, began making the traditional gesture which they always did whenever they gave any advice. This gesture was a simple stretching out of his thumb and little finger and closing the middle three fingers while shaking his palm, also known in Hindi as shendi lagaya, clearing his throat turned sore from his loud whispering. He said, "Well, your royal, extremely esteemed, exuberant, high-on-weed highness, as per the non-physical Newtonstein law of boomerang gravitation, which states that every rolling stone, if rolled or thrown, gathers mud moss momentum and returns to us. And as moss is simply energy of the solar variety converted by light into matter of the vegetational variety, therefore it's simple logic, your royal highness, that..." But before he could complete, the king lost his patience and, interrupting his never-ending complicated advice, said in a petulant or bad-tempered and unreasonable tone, "Oh, shut up, you over-articulate windbag of the such a thoroughbore variety. I have been harboring nothing but a bunch of fetid fools. Get out of my visual vista." Thus, shooing away his crony royal advisers, the king then turned to his palace guards and ordered, "Hey, you peeping Tom and eavesdropping guard of the royal harem, just catch that damn mischief-making mouse, throw away his exaggerated, overrated hat, and shoo him away." Ever willing to oblige, the obedient palace guard, with one swift stroke of his spear, end of the second part of total 4 parts.